Hello and welcome to the r/my RPG Bookclub. Today we are looking at a charity bundle that we put together with the proceeds going to the accessibility-based charity Dots RPG project. They've done a variety of things such as produce braille-based dice and LED convention spaces, and worked on alt texts and tools for making accessible PDFs, and just a huge list of things that they've done and will continue to do for accessibility in tabletop RPGs. The bundle is available for free. I want, as well as being to promote accessibility in tabletop games, this is also to promote tabletop RPGs in general. And I think it being free really lends itself to promoting both of those things. Of course, donations to Dots in purchasing this bundle are very much appreciated. It will be available on June 24th, which it may already be by the time you see this video. There's about $100 of value if you put everything that costs money in here in general, and so it's definitely fair to donate for that. However, there is absolutely no requirement or obligation to feel. You should feel absolutely fine about not paying if you can't afford to donate any at this time or simply don't want to. That is entirely your choice. Of course, if in return you'd, promote Dots RPG or the bundle, just talk about it with people post about it on social media with these hashtags if you feel like it, that would also be very appreciated, but again, no real obligation. We've got 40 innovative, underappreciated passion projects that I have all gone through and looked at for functionality and a baseline of polish. And, I've been in communication with all the creators and sort of fine-tuned some of the elements of the games with them in some cases. We've got RPGs of 24 words and ones over 100 pages, ones that add skill or dexterity to rolling, ones that focus on IRL action, solo games, one where a full party controls a single character, full campaigns or single sessions or mini campaigns, things that are just based on lore or generating roads. Some that include dice elements, tarot card elements, full trading card game elements, sci-fi and fantasy and historical fiction. Really, there's a ton of variety here, and all of them I think are worth taking a look at if they interest you. A lot of them are actually free already, just, because they're pay what you want titles, so even if it's not at launch date yet, there's a bunch of these you can just sort of look at over before you decide whether you want to spend money donating to the bundle when it comes out. Of course, you're not going to get the same level of polish as you might buy a huge budget studio produced creation, but I think some of those sometimes actually get lost in actually making the mechanics decent when they're sort of focused on marketing and hyped and art and stuff like that, which is all great, but if you're looking for something with purely really creative mechanics and story elements, and if you're lucky, some pretty good art to go along with it, then these are definitely worth checking out. I think that about covers the summary of what we're trying to do here. There's not a ton of games, but I've made sure the ones that are in here are things you probably haven't seen before and are also very worth checking out. And to get started, I think we're just going to go over some of the full system core books for now. And some of these are upwards of 200, maybe even 300, I haven't checked in a bit, pages. I will be looking at the PDFs for a lot of them, but I don't have the most recent version for some, so some of the information I show you might be a bit out of date, but the overall scope of the game shouldn't have changed. Alright, the first project we will be looking at is Chains of Gaelia, though I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it. a video game inspired. I believe it is generally FromSoft in particular, if you know what that is, gothic fantasy with rich lore, where choice of weapon impacts moveset as much as class. And so that sort of gives you an overview of it. But I'm going to be, in this video where I can go a bit more in depth, trying to look at some of the highlights of each of these systems. So, looking at the PDF, and you can kind of see I have notes up there to make sure I know what to talk about. Unfortunately, it kind of zooms things out, but, what can you do? We have Chains of Gaelia, a dark fantasy RPG, and this is the quick start guide. Like I said, it may not be the most current version of the quick start guide, but I'm fairly certain, it was like less than a year since I downloaded this, so I doubt everything will have been radically changed since then. There may be some improvements, but not anything that would sort of destroy the qualities that I found in it. In this system, as well as having a lot of interesting and fun mechanics, has probably more developed lore than a lot of the other systems I've looked at, involving sort of dark and non-dark gods, I believe. It's been a bit, but I was fairly impressed with the lore. The effects of these gods started to sort of transform all the residents of the world, and that's a huge factor in terms of the gameplay as well, and we'll be taking a look at that. Yeah, so there's 5 classes. Though a lot of the abilities ultimately come from the weapons. Yeah, karma is one of the things that we're going to be looking at more in depth. But for now, let's just move on a bit. Yeah, I really like some of the side art and borderings here. I want to highlight some of the art, since I think the title page doesn't do everything justice. Actually, there's an ebook version of this too that I think generally looks a bit better, but it's a little harder to show off in this format, so consider getting that when you download things. Anyway, moving back up to the lore to see if there's anything in specific I want to highlight. Yeah, so there's the black and white progeny. So that's sort of the light and dark gods, I guess you could say. And I would say the dark ones are generally more evil from what I remember. It's not, like darkness and light are equal forces in terms of morality, like in some system, though I'm not saying they're direct analogs to good and evil. Black is definitely more on the evil side. Then each of the gods have their avatars, and there are various monstrous races that come from each of the dark gods that I believe people transform into. Now, I want to see if it has anything on transformation here specifically, because we're going to be going back into that. Across Gaelia, wide moors and dense forests are invaded by hordes of staggering creatures whose eyes reflect a melancholic memory of their lost humanity. Beasts are the product of a harrowing process of transformation and a slow fall into corruption and depravity. When committing evil acts, the soul of men are burdened with guilt, represented by black karma cards taken from the deck of major arcana. So there's some of the tarot card incorporation. When their karma becomes too dark for their mortal bodies to sustain, their minds fill up with the malicious whispers of their dark progeny, and they begin turning into shadows, and then into more hideous and dangerous beasts. And you can see some of that in the bestiary here, though the bestiary is somewhat limited for this quick start. On the other hand, the pious and saintly, as well as the zealots, can accrue white karma cards and walk a path toward ascension to the heavens and transformation into bright, shining angels. And we'll take a look at that too. Right? Let's get to... There was some other interesting stuff in there, but you can check that out yourself. I suppose I may as well go up to the table of contents and see what page karma is on. Yeah, sometimes books have, clickable things in the table of contents that'll link you there in PDFs, but it looks like this one does not, which, is what it is. That's a nice feature, but it's hardly necessary. I can just scroll down to 49 once I find the page numbers. There we go. Yeah, I find not having it there at all a little better than it linking to the wrong thing, which I have found happens in some PDFs. I can't recall if that happens in any of the ones that I have put to this system, and I never know if it's just on my end or not, but that sometimes happens as well. This is dual wielding. It might have been 49, not 39. I said I could scroll down, but I forgot that my memory is terrible. Alright, there we go. Karma. The mother teaches us that every action has a consequence, that the most evil men cast the longest shadow, and that disobedience is paid for with death. The pious man does not tolerate the beast. He fights his existence from without, through sharp blade, and from within with burning faith. Excerpt from the sermons of High Priest Roderick the Pious. Gaelia is a dark and mysterious place where one man's actions and decisions cause physical and mental consequences and can lead characters to radical transformations or even death. While exploring the game world, characters will inevitably make choices which can lead them down increasingly dangerous and thorny paths. This is where karma cards become useful. If the master, which I'm assuming is the game master, it's been a long time since I've looked, believes that a character has done a particularly good or evil deed, the player marks a white for good deeds or black for evil deeds karma card on their character sheets. The two types of cards cancel each other out. For example, a character with 2 black karma cards who commits a good deed ends up with a single black karma card. The maximum number of karma cards that can be accumulated is 3. If a player were to commit an action that would cause them to draw a 4th card, the player goes into overload. If a character goes into overload, they must draw 4 karma cards of the corresponding color from the deck of Major Arcana. If they draw the Fool, they undergo a catastrophic metamorphosis. If they draw their Lucky Tarot, they undergo Ascension. If both the Fool and their Tarot card are among the cards, or neither, the character undergoes temporary madness. That making moral judgments in a complex and contradictory world like Gaelia can be difficult for the master. In such cases, it is good to remember that karma should also represent the character's chosen path, as well as a moral judgment on their actions. An occultist does not need to be necessarily evil, but the corrupting use of black magic might cause them to still have a number of black karma cards. In a similar way, a religious zealot might act in a manner that can be considered evil, but still have white karma due to their use of white magic. An excess of karma cards can cause death, regardless of the color of karma required. This happens because losing oneself following an idea or one's ambitions is dangerous, regardless of the reasons behind it. A character with an abnormal amount of karma moves further and further away from their human nature, approaching either the angelic or the bestial. Another criteria for assigning karma is the contrast between the character's actions and their personality. A white mage, accustomed to the pious life of the faithful, who for some reason finds themselves stealing an apple in the marketplace, might get a black karma card, which goes to represent remorse for a crime they would not have wanted to commit. An action that is more ambiguous and complex to a judge, such as using a forbidden spell to save lives, for example, can be considered either good or evil depending on the personality of the character performing it. In general, karma exists to add drama and consequences to the player's choices, and is meant to be a tool to spur characters to interact as much as possible with Gaelia's contradictions and complexities. Catastrophic metamorphosis. Black karma, curse of the beast. The character permanently turns into a beast. The beast is a type chosen by the master and should reflect the character. A bloodthirsty hunter should turn to a werewolf, an unscrupulous occultist into a ghoul, a cunning rogue into a vampire, and so on. The beast is moved by a murderous rage and immediately attacks the nearest creature. The character counts as dead. So just to sort of recap that, give me a second. Yeah, if they go to 4th and draw the Fool, they get a catastrophic metamorphosis. White Karma, Blinding Light. The divine energy courses through the character's vein, becoming unbearable for their mortal body. The character bursts into a blinding light, granting all creatures within a 15-meter radius a +2 meter to their movement speed, and a +1 bonus to all dex rolls for 10 minutes, as well as healing their HP, SM, and MP. In a circle radius 20 meters around the character, vegetation suddenly sprouts and blooms as a result of the explosion of vital energy. The character counts as dead. So this one would probably be bad for the party. This one would be good for the party, other than the loss of the character. Though, of course, it also heals enemies, potentially. And this one might not be bad for the party if, the creature nearest to the person that turned into the beast is not a party member, but is an enemy. Okay, Ascension. Black Karma, Controlled Psychosis. The character is filled, and I believe this is the one with your lucky character, is filled with murderous fury and teeters on the brink of beast transformation. Their eyes turn pitch black and their skin becomes hairy, scaly, or naturally callous. They permanently gain a +2 bonus to their strength and con scores, and a -2 mallet to wit or WLP, chosen by the player. Their senses are heightened, granting a +2 bonus to perception, and they are able to recognize creatures they have wounded through the scent of their blood. The 4 karma cards drawn are shuffled back into the deck, and the ascended character goes back to having 3. In the case of a second overload in the future, an ascension result counts as temporary madness, and a temporary madness results as catastrophic metamorphosis. Okay, White Karma, Angelic Ascension. The character is blessed, their eyes glow white, and they gain angelic characteristic. +1 to dexterity and will, and -1 to constitution, +2 to all wit, and to discern the attention of others, and they can see the karma color of people, and the body of incorporeal spirits. They gain 2 angelic wings and can fly at their movement speed. The 4 cards drawn are shuffled back into the deck, and the ascended character goes to 3 having white. Yeah, basically the same as black there, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Okay. Temporary Madness, the final result, I believe. The character goes insane for 1d10 hours. The master decides on which banner, nightmares, hallucinations, unable to perform actions voluntarily, and they come to their senses at the end of it. Yeah, and basically the same thing as they're shuffled back in, but the probability of results does not change. Right, it doesn't fully describe what not able to perform actions voluntarily means, whether that means they are controlled by the master or what, but I think that more or less covers karma. I think that's a very fun system to have. Now next, I wanted to just briefly show off the weapon list versus the characters, so I'm just going to look at weapons. Starts at 71. Okay, now this might be it. So I was saying weapons affect things as well as class, but it's really more combat style, which relates to the weapon you pick, so 19 and 37. So just to briefly sort of describe what I mean by what these do versus what weapon styles do, and this might have changed a lot since this is an outdated version probably, but you don't gain all of these as once. These are things you might have initially or gain as you level up. You get a certain combat style, which is like where a lot of your abilities come from. You can choose an additional one for this class. You get +1 on rolls against beast, able to wear light armor, +1 to rolls, +1 to rolls on another thing, +1 to rolls on another thing. So like the class abilities, a lot of them are just +1. I think knights have a few more. But like determines what styles you have, +1 bonuses on a couple rolls. This one, is a bit different. You can survive with 1 HP. But I think it was 37 Actually, the mages are a bit different, because they mostly get stuff from their spell list, and that sort of comes from their class, so they're a little different there. But for physical classes, you then go to combat styles, and this is where a lot of the more solid ability-like stuff happens. Like you can move toward an enemy that's been attacked. You can blind people you parry. You can stun people with a shield bash. So a lot of this stuff is more like the moves or abilities, where the class stuff usually includes bonuses to rolls, but your class can determine what kind of weapon styles you can use. And I believe that's sort of Dark Souls inspired, where a lot of class stuff might affect your starting stats, and then your move list is really determined by the weapon you're using or the spells that you pick. Yeah, stuff like taunt, stuff like press on. You can make an extra attack if you kill someone. So I think that's more or less for some of the highlights of Chains of Gaelia. There are definitely other highlights, but I can only afford to spend so much time on each game unless I want this video to be a massive amount of hours long. So that's it for Gaelia for now. Alright, so for this one, last one we took 15 minutes, I'm hoping, or roughly 15 minutes. I'm hoping to shorten that a bit, and I think I can spend less time on this one. Not because it's more complicated or anything, but I think some of the differences sort of speak for themselves. Let me see what I'm looking at here. Yeah, it's worth noting, the austere edition, which doesn't have any art, and at the time at least was free. I don't know if it's always free. This table of contents does appear to hyperlink, if that is something that is a big plus for you. Let's go back to my description. Okay. Narrative, asymmetric Orwellian game. Players act out the day-to-day of secret rebels, while GM acts as Big Brother. And that, I think, is sort of all you need to know to tell you if you're going to be interested in this system, I think. But I'll try to give you a bit more detail. Yeah, and as I recall, this is supposed to be at least potentially, doomed resistance. Your players are probably not going to succeed. Yeah, Big Brother preparations, resistance character creation. Maybe I'll go over that a little bit, but I think I'm just going to go straight to playing the game for a minute. Central to all role-playing games is the conversation. Someone speaks, someone replies, and through this, the fabric of the narrative is woven. Most role-playing games use a game master to provide rulings, whenever anything in the game has an uncertain outcome, and to basically play as the entire world. Oceania 2084 modifies this structure. The game is still centered around exploratory storytelling, where the players are immersed in a situation and play to unravel its resolution. They embody characters within the game world. Yeah, this is how it's still the same. I think there are two types of players, the Resistance and the Big Brother. Resistance each assume the role of a Resistance character, while also taking turns to roleplay their characters' friends and family members. Yeah, so that's very different from your standard system, where each player sort of has multiple characters. And Big Brother embodies the fascist state and all individuals in the world not connected to the Resistance. Characters' friends or family, or characters' friends or family. Big Brother operates individually, while the Resistance characters collaborate. The Resistance players predominantly have control of the narrative. They define elements such as their characters' places of residence, workplaces, and acquaintances. Meanwhile, Big Brother maintains vigilance, monitoring players for potential crimes, acts of treason, or emotional lapses. When such concerns arise, players are subjected to interrogation. You will assume different characters in the story, describing their actions and locations within agreed safety limits. You won't be crafting it in isolation. Make them engaging and challenging. Okay, yeah. Where are you? Describe location as best you can. Who is there with you? Describe people. What are you going to do and how? And describe your actions. What happens afterwards? How do your actions change? Advice on describing location. I'm probably going to skip this for now and go to a standard play session. Each play session is built around the structure of a day. This is another one of the big differences between a standard system. During the day, players take part in various scenes. During these scenes, they describe their actions and the people they encountered. A standard play session follows a set of phases, the whole play session being around 2 to 4 hours. Morning, and that's you get 3 acts per players at most. Big Brother provides the daily broadcast. It is always a short broadcast boasting about the brother and the party, the progress of the war, and condemning the traitors. Resistance players describe how their characters spend their mornings, and I believe you do that scene by scene as a per player basis. Okay, then work session. The first work section ends with a 2-minute hate procedure that is run by the Big Brother. Social environment, free to spend doing whatever, meet new people, share things, which is lunch, another work session, and then leisure time. Sleep interrogation. Yeah, I'm gonna probably, just to sort of make sure you get a picture of this, look at maybe hate procedure and look at what happens and how player characters actually meet. 2-minute hate sessions. Every work session ends with what is called a 2-minute hate. The 2-minute hate is, narratively speaking, a reoccurring propaganda tool, where the base instinct of anger is channeled towards dissidents and terrorists. All players must make a unity value test. If a test fails, an emotional outburst plays out, and the character is able to join in the hateful chants. If they succeed, they may risk attracting suspicion of their peers. And so looks like succeeding and failing both have consequences there. You can sort of see how the game works of all of the players have their own scenes throughout a day where the game master, Big Brother, sort of interjects to, spew propaganda, take certain actions, and the characters are constantly under suspicion. So it's a very unique game in the way it functions, and it's sort of more focused on storytelling than a lot of the mechanics are. Well, I don't know that a lot of the mechanics would be right, because, players have various specific actions they can take and stuff. It's certainly got plenty of mechanics, I more mean. It's not focused on succeeding or failing overall. Next we have Against the Odds, which sort of has my favorite cover page of the ones we've looked at so far, I think. It is a heroic fantasy powered by the apocalypse, just trying to remember what PBTA stood for in literal terms. Powered by the apocalypse games, where being a hero means non-lethal and selfless acts or succumbing to corruption. So it's a sort of D&D style game in that it's a fantasy game where you, have challenges to deal with. Something I didn't mention, and I don't really have any of my notes, though I should probably go through, is that it has kind of a specific format that it recommends in terms of how to set up a, not necessarily a full campaign, but an arc of a campaign, where, you pick a theme, you choose the current adventure and villain, you go through stuff like that, and then, so it's not as sandboxy, I think, as D&D can be, but otherwise it's fairly similar to Dungeons and Dragons in terms of being a relatively high fantasy setting with classic classes with their own sets of abilities and magic and things such as that. The main differentiation, other than it being PBTA and a heck of a lot simpler than D&D, is that, and that's a changelog, an outdated changelog at that, because, like I said, for all of these I'm looking at old versions. Because some of these games are paid, and I don't want to have to bug people about re-downloading their stuff. You don't really need to know any of that, though. I'm just trying to figure out what I was going to say. Yeah, so how corruption works, because that's the main thing. It's a game about being classic RPG fantasy characters, except killing is something you are very much not supposed to do. If I recall correctly, it's not supposed to be an easy thing to not kill either. It's important that killing is bad, but that also in the game it's not easy to avoid necessarily. That's part of the conflict. Corruption is a way to mechanically reflect how the heroic life affects your character in negative ways. After all, seeing the worst the world can offer, villains and their schemes, has an effect on you. What's worse, sometimes as a heroic figure, you'll have to do things you don't want to in order to stop these villains. And even sort of a best-case scenario in which you stop the villains without doing things you hate, some people may not agree with your behavior, and you'll have to put everyone in great danger. All of this and more is represented by your corruption. Luckily for heroes, there are only a few things that mark corruption. Trigger your calling's corruption move, and we'll get into that. A move tells you to mark corruption, which is often corruption moves. Also do that, and the GM tells you to mark corruption. When your character marks corruption, check off a mark in the corruption check. When you've checked all 4 boxes, clear it and choose a corruption move. If you don't have any more options available, you have to/can choose the option, which makes you retire your character from the heroic life and turn into a villain, because you can pick it early if you want. It rules as written, no way to get rid of it. Okay, yeah, killing villains, for example, is an extremely tempting solution to the threat they pose, but is an assured way to become a villain yourself for the long or even the short run, so I think that, specifically tells you that killing is typically a thing that adds corruption. There's probably more guidance on how a GM decides corruption later that I haven't specifically looked at on this look-through. Characters, classes each have their own specific way that they might gain corruption. There's also generally, if your character does something particularly unheroic, they will gain corruption, and once you gain corruption, let me see if we have the corruption track. There we go. Once you fill 4 of those, you get to pick one of these moves. And this one, nothing really matters to me. You've been consumed by ego and an unquenchable thirst to be the center of attention. Retire your character, they may return as a villain. These are slightly different for every class. And so you can pick that at the beginning, the first time you go up to 4, or you can go through each one of these moves, and once you've picked this one, pick this one, pick this one, and if you fill out 4 corruption a 4th time, there is only this one left, at which point, your character will no longer be playable and potentially become a villain. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could instead have that player continue to control the character as a villain, but that would be a modification to the system that you can personally choose to do. Now, I wanted to sort of go over some of the corruption moves. Mark corruption to clear a condition as you push others away and isolate yourself as the artist, the only one who withstands your work. So that causes you to mark corruption to use it, but you can clear a condition. Like, the corruption moves give you benefits, but they also generally have at least a chance of increasing your corruption by using them. Okay, you can add more options to a basic move that you have. You can have someone believe you care for them and they'll act accordingly, so you can sort of charm someone, but you have to mark corruption for it. You can hurt them with your art, but obviously that would be corrupting. And there's a lot of corruption moves like this, where you get to max out your you get to max out one of your stats, but whenever you roll a 10 plus with that stat, you would mark corruption. Now, max plus 4 does not mean you can take this multiple times, it's just saying that the max of that stat increases to +4 instead of its normal +3, if I remember right. And there's also an experience track here. There's a lot of sort of fun stuff with the classes. I'm not going to go over the bard move specifically, because I don't think it's the best demonstration of the kind of moves that you can get. There's fun stuff like heroic sacrifices that certain characters can do. There's advanced options like epic moves. There's a lot of interesting stuff to progression for relatively rules medium or even rules light, depending how you consider things system. And I will look a little more closer into berserker abilities, because I think it's a bit more demonstrative. Okay, so you can get rage and do specific moves or effects with rage. This one's fun. When you get +1 when you're at death's door, and on a miss you can offer death in exchange for your life. If she accepts, you'll go on to live another day. If you survive, clear fatigue equal to your spirit. The death mechanics for this game are interesting in general, but you get better at bargaining on not dying. If you're a berserker, I think that's very fun. And you get +1 based on certain motivations and stuff. You can improve stats. You can clear fatigue to get scars. You can intimidate people or taunt them, really. And now we go on to corruption moves. You get +1 when you're at death's door, but each time you survive it, you mark corruption. You get an additional +1 to a thing. But again, you can mark corruption every time you do it in a certain way. Yeah, and this one is more standard. You get an increase in stats, but when you roll a 10+ on it, you mark corruption again. And no paths are straight. You've succumbed to a deep sense of isolation and fatalism. Your battle fury against the world is all that left. Retire your character, they may return as a villain. And yeah, you mark corruption when you hurt someone innocent, is the berserkers are a specific one. And I think that sort of covers some of the highlights of Against the Odds. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. Alright, next up, Simple D100 Fantasy. Which, the name really helps you figure out what that is there, yeah. What it says on the tin, with some interesting twists on D100 resolution mechanics, which, I can't verify are 100% unique. I don't have that much familiarity with D100 based systems, so. But they seemed pretty interesting to me either way. Yeah, dice rules, ages to character creation simplicity. So, it's a D100 system, and it is a sort of full rulebook setting agnostic system. So, for its relative simplicity, it is not simplistic compared to a more rules mid or light system, I would say. Though maybe you could consider it rules mid. I'm inspired by, basic fantasy role-playing. I'm losing steam a bit, so I'm probably going to have to take a break soon. Yeah, you roll a D100 and get equal to or under a relevant skill value. At that point, pretty normal. However, a successful high roll, how high a successful roll is, affects how well you succeed. This is quality and is determined by the tens roll of your die. Example, if your skill in athletics is 65, you need to roll 65 or lower to succeed. If you roll a 43, your quality is 4. If you roll a 03, your quality is 0. And that sort of makes things interesting, because you want to roll low enough to beat the stat, but you don't want to roll too low because you want your quality to be good. I can't quite remember if there are additional mechanics that sort of lean into that. I can't remember if there are ways for you to actually affect how low your roll is, or it's entirely luck, but it's interesting either way. Yeah, and so some actions have a difficulty which requires a certain minimum quality, and that can, change the difficulty of the check, even though your stat relatively sets chances of success. I think that's something that's fairly important for any roll under skill based system to have. Otherwise, unless it's a really simple system, you need something that makes it so, your chance of success is not dictated entirely by your skill level and the luck. So it's good that a system like that exists. And also, this means that the higher your stat is, also affects your ability to clear something. Like, if difficulty instead was just straight the lower you roll, the better, that would have the challenge of, anytime you roll well enough, you're sort of like, that would guarantee success on most things by a low roll, is what I'm trying to say, if quality was about how low you rolled. But since it's about how high you roll, it depends, and also if your skill level is not good enough for the quality, like if you need to get a quality of 4 but your skill is 30, that means you just couldn't succeed because you would have to roll under 30 to succeed based on your skill, but a roll of 30 or under won't beat a quality of 4, and thus you couldn't succeed in that case. So it really creates some interesting interplay between, how high your skill is, despite causing the stat to be higher, and rolling lower generally being better. The stat being higher is still good because, other than just being more likely to roll under it, you also need it to be high because higher rolls are better. Yeah, so ignoring the quality gate, the higher your skill is, the higher ceiling for the quality is. Because, if you've got like a 90 and you roll an 80 versus you roll a 40 for a success, which you would need if you had a skill level under 50, you can do it a lot better in the first case. So your skill not only affects your chances to succeed as your chances to roll under, but the higher the roll that you can roll under at, and higher rolls are still better, despite you needing to roll under to succeed. So I think that's a really fun way of doing things. Like I said, I don't know if that is unique to this system fully, but it's definitely very interesting. The other thing was advantage, I believe. Okay, because advantage, like, I know it varies from some D100 systems at least. Like, I think Call of Cthulhu, the advantage system involves, like, rolling 3 dice or something, or rolling one of those die a second time and being able to replace it or something like that. But in this version, that means you can flip your roll after it's made. So if you got like a 63, you could change that into a 36. And, the 36 would be under a 40, whereas the 63 would not. Or if you roll, your skill is 70 and you get a 36, you can change that to a 63 because you succeed other way, but a 63 has higher quality, so it also affects quality. So I think that's a very fun system, especially to use because there's a little bit of strategy in there, it feels like, and it's just fun to flip numbers, and it affects the quality as well as the chance of success, so that's all very interesting. I really like the twist they had there. The other thing is that I wanted to briefly go over is character creations. Like, you can do things by point by or by, like, age. Like, it tells you how many points you can get and how to buy stuff, or you sort of go through character creation step by step in adolescence, right? You select 10 skills, like, you either select things representative of phases of life in character creation if you don't want to just do point buy. So I think that's very interesting too. And like I said, it's a lot of pages, but the text on these pages are pretty big. For a D100 generic fantasy system, this is a very simple rule set. So, if any of that sounds good to you, as usual, check it out. Next up, we have Occult Barcelona, and I'm going to try to speed up on these just a little. It is a horror investigation game about losing yourself through magic. It's got this sort of newspaper-esque style that I think is very nice. It's got a table of contents. You can't link to those. It's a relatively simple system, I think, if I remember right. But sort of some of the stuff that makes it stand out are first the spells. And part of what helps doing this a bit faster is that, never mind, this was longer than I remember. It's not really shorter than some of the other things I've shown, but I'll get to why in a minute, because the basic rules are pretty simple. You've got spells, and there's a lot of details on this with specific, I guess I'll call them schools of magic for now, even though that's not really what they are. Well, I mean, it might be what they are, but it's not what, I don't know if that's what the term is. Funnily enough, if you'll remember in the description of the bundle, I said that some of these could be a bit rough around the edges at times, and an example of that, this specifically, this section is not links, and there's no underlines, except the page numbers. There's a bit of a workaround. Just an interesting little tidbit where the words on one section of spell doesn't work, but the page numbers that are associated with those words actually will. That's kind of funny, I hadn't seen that before. And just having these being links at all is going above and beyond, so that some of them are a little wonky. Certainly isn't the end of the world, but what I was trying to get to is there's a pretty detailed spell list with specific effects, and most of them are investigation focused, but they're still pretty interesting. You've got this where you can lock something, you can see everything about it, the description, the cost, casting time, needs, all the stuff you have to do to cast it. And all the spells are like this, they're very well laid out. This is one of the less investigation-based ones, where it doesn't just provide information or do something, that you could maybe do in an investigation through other means, but you can actively take damage instead of someone, if I remember correctly. And this lets you create a full barrier magically, so there's definitely some stuff in there that's a little more, physically impactful than the other stuff, but a lot of it is stuff that can help you gain information in different ways, which is very appropriate for a, investigation style game. Like I was saying, along with, in terms of the things that really make it stand out, you've got the spells, which I went over just a little bit of. You got the layout, which I think looks very nice. You've got a lot of solid links, but also you have got a ton of stuff that is specifically for game masters or for the world or about running the game. Like, if you just went by the stuff the players need to know, it would only be like, I don't know, up to 30 pages, with most of that being the list of spells. But there's like a bunch of extensive resources for what the game is actually like and how to run it, and I think that's a very cool way of doing things. It's not something you see that often. You should definitely see it more often, I feel. But first there's all this stuff about the world of the game. And then you get different kinds of monsters. And then you get to the Game Master's tools. Now this, I'm assuming, basic way to determine when you make a check. Failing forward, sure, that works for a lot of stuff. Let's see if it's actually advising it or just sort of discussing it. It seems to be relatively advised. There's stuff for spell creation, which I'm assuming is something players can potentially do too. Mechanics, leveling up, creating creatures, investigation structure, which I think is something that is hugely helpful to have in an investigation style game, because what's going to separate one game from another isn't necessarily mainly the player-facing mechanics for investigations, but how those investigations are supposed to be run, so having something that really lays it out is helpful. Even though I suppose that formatting could be improved a bit. And so something supernatural happens, everybody meets up, there's an investigation, pressure, revelation, containment, fallout. So this is a lot of good ways to organize the flow of a case, and I think there was earlier stuff about this too, but basically that's just some of the highlights of this system. One more thing, I suppose, and hopefully this will be changed by the time the bundle actually comes out, but it is worth noting that, or maybe it already has been changed. Like I said, all of these are old versions of the games, potentially, that I have downloaded, but yeah, I don't know what the best section to show this with is, but I want to at least have one example. Yeah, so cost is the amount of fatigue points it takes to cast a spell. Yeah, but fatigue points are gained and expended, and fatigue points being gained and expended, I think, means the same thing. It's sort of an issue of how the character sheet is, because you mark when you spend a fatigue point, but phrasing that as adding fatigue kind of creates confusion. So I'm pretty sure, expending fatigue points and adding them is the same thing, which is a little bit of an issue with language, I feel, but is, if I'm right about that, relatively easy to get used to once you notice it. But otherwise, this is definitely a very interesting, really fleshed out, rules light at least, or low end of mid on the player side, in occult investigation RPG. Next up, we have Dice and Glory. It's sort of a mix of fantasy and sci-fi, potentially, as you can see by the art. It's agnostic, so you can probably just pick one of them if you prefer. It appears more geared toward fantasy overall. I really like a lot of the art in the book. I think it's quite fun. And what you'll notice pretty quickly, I don't even have any notes up here. I didn't for the last game. I used to, but they sort of got deleted when I closed the window. But I don't even really have any notes up here, because I think right off the bat you'll be able to tell what the system's strength is, which is, 2 200 pages of detailed specifications for things, and this is 200 details, 200 pages were, as far as I remember, none of it is setting related. And here we have, so that should tell you a little bit about how crunchy it is. Starvations and thirst, cave-ins and avalanches, suffocation and drowning, movement penalties based on terrain or environment. You can see a lot of the stuff coming together, I think. Cantrips, curses, race of magic, tandem and inverse casting, series spells, triggered spells. Let's go into character creation, because that had a lot of stuff as well. Race, size, base attributes, attribute strata of the universe, various averages, knockout and hit points, reach, visual range, earshot. So as you can see, this is a lot crunchier than most modern systems you'll find, or maybe that's a bit too much of an overextension, but most trendy modern systems you'll find anyway. One of the things I think you can highlight is, because this is one of the ones I read less extensively because it was kind of late into acquiring submissions and it was just so long, but I've definitely read enough to know that it works, and I figure if a system this big has, some flaws that don't present themselves immediately, you're kind of expecting to put a lot of planning into how exactly you're going to run it. So some stuff that you have to change for yourself isn't, for the way you want to run the game, isn't the end of the world, I feel, for a system like this. Not that I'm saying I encountered any, but just like, if there was any hidden that I didn't see, I'm still fairly comfortable recommending this to anyone that likes a sort of crunchy style game. I was going to get back to knockout points, so I haven't really thought about the balance of this. No links, unfortunately, which I'm only mentioning just because this one is so long that it would definitely be helpful, but as you can see, a lot of information. You are stunned for one action when you take amount of KO damage equal to half your current KO point score, and if it drops to 0, you are knocked out until you recover at least once. So it's a very interesting, knockout system where you have a separate amount of stun from your health pool. I think I have seen that somewhere else before. I can't quite remember where. But it's very interesting. It doesn't seem immediately incorrect, or, badly put together. I only mention that because I didn't really have, I wasn't going to go into the exact minutia of whether I thought this would be balanced. Because again, I think that's kind of missing the point of a system like this, where balance is something you are expected to adjust it a bit as the game master to what you find best. But it definitely seems like it would work. Yeah, I'm trying to see what it says, because it might have been in dealing damage. I know I read something about... Okay, typically when something deals damage, it first deals damage to a character's KO points, and then after that, their HP becomes damaged. Yeah, and some things can bypass KO points entirely instead. Yeah, and then you're stunned, so potentially you would be stunned for every hit once your KO is completely depleted, which is one of those things I think, you will want to adjust potentially based on how you want your game to play out as a game master, but I think it clearly reflects a lot of the designer's intent behind this. It was something. Oh yeah, I was trying to remember what an action is, because I think an action is like a full turn, but it might not even be a full turn action / attack support melee, because losing one action isn't even might not even be that big a deal in this. Let me see if I can remember. Yeah, so you get more actions per battle as you advance. So even though you're stunned for every hit potentially once you run out of KO, that doesn't mean you lose your turn. So I guess it would be each attack that hits, you would lose more actions on your turn. Oh yeah, the initiative system for this was also very interesting if I remember. I don't even know if it was called initiative. Okay, it is. Down to 59. I'm ending up being more scattered at looking at this over than I wanted to be, but basically I just want to show how much detail and thought has been put into all of this, and if you find that intimidating, this might not be the system for you. If you find it exciting, I think you should definitely check this out. Yeah, when a character first encounters a potentially violent situation, must first be rolled. The highest initiative goes first, and the other characters each take their turn in descending order. Okay, a round is a time it takes for all the combatants to use up all of their actions / attacks, and is used only while in a combat situation. A melee round begins when all of the characters roll their initiatives. They then alternatively take turns until they have all exhausted their number of turns. The round ends, and then they re-roll initiative. So that was sort of the thing that was different about it, that some characters would get more turns, or in this case, I think it's effectively actions, but would get more turns per round, depending on various factors, and then initiative is re-rolled after every round. So that's quite a different take on combat than you'll see most of the time. Alignments, there we go, classes. So the class generally doesn't matter that much, like there's no consequence to multi-classing. The main thing is, honestly, it may take too much time to refine some of this. Okay, I think this is what I was looking for. Yeah, you earn XP by combat, and then when you earn enough, you can buy a new character level, gaining skill points and hit points, or purchase abilities called feats. So the skill points are kind of mainly what you spend everything on. And the class sort of just gives you a couple basic bonuses, and you can multi-class as much as you want. So it's mainly deciding what you purchase with your skill points to determine your progression path. So that's Dice and Glory. It is a quite crunchy. I feel like sometimes people only want crunchy to refer to math and not other kinds of complexity. And other than the derived stats, I don't know that this is a very mathy game, but it is quite a complex one. And if that's what you're into, I definitely think you'll have a great time with this. It's setting agnostic, it's got fantasy and sci-fi elements, it's got a lot of solid art, so definitely check it out if it interests you, as usual. Alright, here is Fated Seas, and this is a demo. You can see, the cutoff here of what will be in the full copy. But what you do get, additional rules, combat equipment, background, destiny and fate, 7 guilds, character statistics, classes, origins, all the explanation of the rules. So you certainly get enough to play off of. And as you might be able to tell from the notes up there, For this one, we'll be focusing on playing cards, or, well, rather trading cards, because this is a trading card RPG. I wasn't exactly sure what to highlight without re-going over everything. Because, this is a non-traditional RPG, so it'll take a while to sort of set back into it in my mind. And I think I mostly focused on the card mechanics when I was looking it over at first anyway. But you've got your dice, d12s, I suppose, and you use checks. Then you have your class deck, which is what we're really going to be looking at mostly. Here's an example. One of the interesting things about this card game, or the card game mechanics of this RPG, is that you have a discard and an exhaust pile, and the discard pile might get reshuffled into your deck sooner than the exhaust pile. You don't like throw away the exhaust pile cards, but you probably need to rest or something before getting them back. I don't quite remember the detail. While there are ways to regain your discard easier, between fights, or just there are probably some abilities that let you. So you got card name as card type, attribute and target number. Yeah, and you need to do checks to pull off the card ability successfully a lot of the time, so that's an added element of chance, and more in line with your standard RPG, which throws a very interesting wrinkle in things. Yep, you get poison, you get healing, you get damage, there's an energy value. And you gain energy from using it. I can't quite remember what that means. This is one of the ones that I looked at a long time ago. Yes, and then some cards let you play other cards with energizing. Yeah, and then exhausted cards, which if you use cards to energize, then they become exhausted rather than discarded, as well as some cards just being automatically exhausted, and that's the separate from the discard pile. And you can freely look at and rearrange the discard pile at any time. So there's a lot of different details. You can see all this stuff. And while I can't precisely remember all the details at present, I remember looking through quite a bit of it, and I didn't see anything that was, broken. It all seemed to work out, basically. I'm trying to find where they get to the cards, because this is definitely something you'll want to know. And they've got setting information in there, too, so it's not just the rules that are in there in the demo. You get other information, too. Yeah, so you can go to their website to see the cards, but I think there was something, here it links them more directly, which is very helpful. So, which of these sounds fun to check out? Now, let's look at Executioner. It's open link. I hope I can open it in a new window, at least. No, this isn't a huge problem. So, each card has its own art, which, is standard for a trading card game, but very nice to see. With this, you deal melee weapon damage and gain force. Your next card deals 2 extra damage, so that gives you some benefits. Yeah, you get extra movement. I suppose there's also movement in this game. So there's the training cards, there's dice checks, there's where your character is in physical space. It's a very three-dimensional setup, both literally and metaphorically, or maybe not literally. I don't know if there's any sort of height to the abilities, but yeah. So the main mechanic for this, I suppose, is force, but it's a lot of damaging abilities, some status effect based abilities. I can't tell if any of these exhaust or not, because I don't know the symbol associated with it. Don't quite recall that, but as you can see, there's a lot of thought and effort put into all of this, and it's the same for every character class, so if you're looking to check out a trading card game RPG fusion, I would definitely recommend this one. Now, thankfully, I should say, we're getting on to some of the simpler games. This is effectively a full system. You know, maybe you could consider it more of a mini campaign thing, but I think it works for full ones. And it is only 12 pages, so that should tell you right off the bat that it's a lot less of a load to take on than the other games I've showed off so far. And it is all samurai themed. A fictional version of Japan, effectively. You're trying to sort of determine who the next shogun is going to be and support whoever you want. There's some setting information, some information on the various clans, which is important. Then for character creations, you choose the clan and give it some appropriate questions. Little things like this, I think, are very helpful for character creations and systems, and sometimes they're overlooked. General background. There's about 4 of those. Okay, choose the value of your attributes. Total they must add to 2. Let me try and remember how this works. And okay, these are effectively the different stats. It's just kind of funny that peasant is one, so I wanted to make sure I was getting that right. That's a very unique way of doing things. Social standing and sort of the different skills that come with them can be very important in this game. I think peasant is less how much of a peasant you are and more how much, how good you are at doing things peasants might, and potentially how good you are at interacting with them. And there are the different scars. Damage or certain types of damage work through scars in this game, which is something you might have seen in other systems, where they also affect your stats, and, once you have a run out of scars to add, pretty much you die. I think that's how it goes, if I remember right. Relatively basic check system, but there are advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, roll 3 instead of 2 and discard the lowest, so relatively standard for advantage. Yep, scars, armor takes away damage. So I've sort of just been mumbling about this for a bit. However, what I really wanted to look at is some of the sort of that social standing stuff I was talking about, which isn't really exclusively social standing. Inheritance is part of the character's past, and you get buffs based on all of these, and what's interesting is, I can't remember if this was explicitly mentioned or sort of implied, but, you can have a character that dies and then inherits something from your last character. The character improves his honor and wealth scores, he moves up the social ladder. Honor and wealth are separate things that determine progression, which is interesting as well. Like, the main thing that I thought was really unique, and I don't want to say cool, because that implies the other stuff isn't cool, but, really sort of a hook about the system for me was the way progression worked, because it's very interesting. Like, the scar elements kind of add a level of D progression. You get this inheritance, which can sometimes carry over from characters. You get the social position that advances through the whole thing, and, you get various benefits, including you get new skills, you get an attribute, and chi. In this one, you gain a whole fiefdom. This is a relatively light system, so there's not, a ton of rules dictating fiefdoms and stuff, so you're going to have to fill fill out a bit of that yourself, but, as well as just progressing your character, you also progress what they have and their wealth, or I guess their wealth determines your progression. And you get in this whole fiefdom that advances the whole time, so I thought that was all really cool to look at. Yeah, and you got this whole honor thing, so relatively simple samurai system. You get a map, but with, I think, a progression system with really a huge amount of depth and something that just really does the job of it's trying to do of being a game for samurai role playing that, is serious but doesn't take itself too seriously. Moving on to Dreadful Nights, and I think this is the smallest of our full systems at just 2 pages. Well, this and the other variation of it. A simple system to tell a classic story of night filled with dread and terror. The themes can span suspense, thriller, mystery, supernatural, and beyond. And it's important to remember that this is very much a system designed for beginners, or at least for the GM to be somewhat experienced, and then the players to be complete beginners. You just get 3 stats. There are some derived stats, which are pretty swingy, but I don't think that's the end of the world for horror. And it's a very simple success-failure thing that not a lot of things affect, if I remember right. Yeah, it's rolling under. Yeah, and this is interesting. They basically tell you to increase what failures do as time goes on, despite failures being very possible at any time. It's pretty impressive, I think, that they went for a sanity system in such a sanity mechanic in such a simple system, but you fail a nerve check, you can lose sanity, or you can be asked directly to make that check. So, this is all, fairly basic. I don't think in and of itself it's, captivating per se, but with the idea of it being for less experienced players, I think it comes together pretty well. You might want to alter some stuff for yourself while running it, but that's up to you. The reason I think this is, part of the reason I think it's a worthy addition is that it actually has a whole additional version to it. Here we have Spooky Cats. And this is the same game, but with a more family-friendly angle. And I actually do kind of think whichever version you're going to play, if you're the GM, you should read both. It's rules light and new friendly, and is a more, friendly version of the Deadly Knights. They take stray cats, pets, magic familiar, whatever it is. Different stats, which I think all make sense for them being cats. This one actually has magic in there in a little more detail. That's about the same. The consequences for this are not nearly as bad as the other game, which is a good thing to establish. Bad as in bad for the player, not bad as in not good from a design perspective. Health points and damage, but it should be stress or minor injuries like bumping the heads or twisting an ankle. Yep, no major physical damage because they're cats. And then that is just unconscious until they're to safety. So I think this, in particular, is a really good system idea for beginners. And I think having the option of doing a more lethal, adult-focused version of it or a more simple, cozy version, I think is a very nice twist. So I think both of them together complement each other quite a bit. I'm trying to look at the sort of derived stats to this one, like their health is just set at 5 was the other game. There was also sanity, and the stats had to be derived, the health and the sanity had to be derived from other stats, if I remember right. So this also has a little bit less of a load for potentially younger players. So, like I said, both very simple, beginner-friendly systems that I think it's very cool to have a scary, clearly meant for longer play, lethal version with sanity and stuff like that, and then have this much more friendly version with actual sort of direction and advice on how to keep it friendly, I think is important. You know, specifically describing how you should handle damage and stuff. I think that's a very nice touch. So check that out if you're trying to introduce some people to role-playing games and it sounds like a fun system to you, especially if you're going for something horror-related. I think, the Spooky Cats version can really fit for anything. We're moving into Rise of the Giga Mechs, which is the last of the, full systems, which I think is good because I definitely need a break. Like some of these simpler full systems, you could debate whether all of those are full systems in comparison to the mini campaigns, especially the ones that greatly exceed the amount of text that these ones have, but these I think seem like they're intended for long form play, and some of these, even the ones that say you can do long form play with them, are more intended for a couple of sessions at first. So that's sort of what I was basing that on. Anyway, the first interesting thing about Rise of the Gigamechs is that it's not called that at all. It's actually Clash of the Gigamechas, and I really need to fix that. I apparently went from memory for the name, and I remembered it wrong. But it is a science fiction tabletop role-playing game set in a galaxy in war between two space kingdoms. And there's some acknowledgements, the usual stuff. And what's very interesting about this game is that you start out as teenagers in an academy. Some background on the mechs and the war that is happening. You start out in the academy. Okay, the academy. And you have 3 stats. Your basic smarts, your toughness, and how hot you are, which is, of course, important in any sort of high school to college-based roleplay. It sort of starts as a teen drama, with some serious elements, and then sort of potentially goes into full-on Warhammer when, setting-wise, once the players grow up. Maybe Warhammer isn't the right point of comparisons. I know it was one of the inspirations, but I don't know if that tone-wise it ever reaches that point. But you also have influence separate from your stats in the academy, and you gain it, and it has a lot of things it can do for you. Create the cadet, there's some archetypes, all very endearing art, I feel. Your class archetype affects your stats, and you can fiddle with the attributes a little if you give yourself a negative. Or maybe it's just no matter what starting archetype you pick, you get a +1 and a -1. I think that's more it. And you can have a drive, make out with other cadets. You can see where some of the teen drama element is there. And then you can see where some of the more serious elements are there. Proving you are right and adults are wrong. So definitely a little bit of tongue-in-cheek there at this phase of the game. Yeah, and there are tests that you do throughout the year. It's PBTA inspired, so you've got a set of academic moves. And then we switch out to, I wouldn't say the real stuff, but honestly it kind of is, because they say you can skip the academy entirely if you want to. Yeah, but hotness as a stat matters less, and influence does not matter anymore, which I think is potentially tonally inappropriate, even if it can be a little restrictive story-wise. Yeah, so you can skip the academy entirely apart, but, I wouldn't recommend that. It's clearly intended to be part of play, but this is where the bulk of the system is. Because you have got much more stats for the mechs, you've also got a lot more moves, if I recall. Like, there are much more things you can do with a mech than you can as a person. Like, all that stuff was separate from the moves, and the move list is still bigger than the teen move list, so to speak. This academic advance rolls. So I was trying to find the stats for the mechs just to sort of show you those, if I can remember where that is. You get cool word plus initiative plus 2-digit number. I think that's a fun little bit of advice. And they've got halls and energy. And you can spend that energy on various things. And a Giga mech has their own stats, which are probably mostly what you'll be using versus the player stats, which carry over from the academy. Yeah, you got a type. You got systems, so it's a fairly detailed mech game as well as being a teen drama game, and I think that's a very fun sort of fusion. There's clearly a bit more detail on the mech section, and you can even skip the academy entirely, but I definitely think that would be part of the fun. So as usual, check it out if it sounds interesting. It's probably I don't know if it's more complicated than Otakaiden or not, but it's definitely much more in depth than the Spooky Nights or the Dreadful Nights or the Spooky Cats, which are designed for new players. This has a little more teeth to it in terms of detail, but it's still relatively simple. Still something that you really fill out a campaign with, despite its simplicity. Only like pages aren't numbered, so I can't quite tell from here. Maybe table of contents will tell me if there's one. Nope. So not quite sure how many. Page 2 of 17 it says up there. So a decent chunk of pages, but still much more light than you would normally expect something. Well, maybe not normally expect, than a full campaign system might otherwise be. So if you're looking for something a little less intense, and the themes of the sort of transition into this, from this lower stakes academy world to real front lines warfare, this is definitely a system to explore that in. And with that, I can take a break for a bit.